discuss a little bit about lamprey habitats in relation to the SFCC Habitat training course. First of all, just a very basic lamprey ecology for those of you who don't know much about these beasts. We've got two species in the UK. At the moment they're separated into three species, but it's been recently found there's actually only two. We've got a sea lamprey, which is the large anadromous species, and we've got a river and brook lamprey, which are very akin to sea trout and brown trout, same species, but one goes to the estuary, that's the river lamprey, and one stays put in the freshwaters all the time. But effectively, in terms of what we're looking at, habitats of the actual beasts, we are interested in particularly the juvenile stages. That is, they spend up to 7 years in very soft sediments, feeding on organic detritus, and then either they will mature, either staying put and reproducing in the same sort of area as brook lampreys, or they'll head off down to the estuary as river lampreys, or way out into the sea and parasitise other fish in the case of sea lampreys. So we're looking at the juvenile habitat, and we're also looking at when the fish come back up again, the lampreys come back up, and where they actually choose to spawn. So what happens is these lampreys, they emerge from the egg and they disperse passively in the current. They're tiny little, under 7 or 8 millimetres long. They're called amocetes at this stage. They settle in areas of sedimentary position, quite a lot of activity and quite a lot of movement between sediment patches. And they spend up to 7 years in these various different patches within their river systems, where they transform into the adult form and then reproduce. Once they reproduce, they then die. So this is the juvenile form. These are amocetes here. We have that they're blind, they don't have any eyes at this stage, and they're fairly non-selective kind of detrivores. Adult form, this is a sea lamprey here. It has developed eyes, it's got the very characteristic sucker in which this one uses to parasitise itself onto other fish. So really, when we're looking at a habitat for lampreys, the majority of the stuff we're looking at in rivers is for the amocetes, so these little detrivores. But as adults, the adults pretty much spawn in the same locations as we would be looking for trout and salmon to be spawning in. Sea lampreys certainly tend to spawn in areas that you would associate with salmon reds, the kind of glides at the tail of pools, just with the break of slope, and the water starting to speed up, going into a riffle or a run area. And this is just some pictures of some sea lamprey spawning locations that we've got close to where I work. You can see just like a salmon red, an area of cleaned gravel, sometimes metres long. But you'd see them in May and June when nothing else is really about making these marks. So if you come across these kinds of patches in gravel that you'd think that looks like a red of a salmonid, then at that time of year it's going to be most likely to be either a sea lamprey spawning pit, or it could be river lampreys as well. You can see they're fairly clear. You can move some fairly large substrates as well. When we're looking at the larvae, the amocetes, we're looking at the habitats that they actually occupy. We've got some kind of standard definitions that we use when we're looking at site condition monitoring, and we have optimal and suboptimal habitats. And this is open to some debate, and I think the actual boundary between optimal and suboptimal has to be taken fairly with a bit of flexibility. But optimal habitat, as far as SNH and other people are concerned, is defined as being stable, fine sediment or sand, which is more than 15 centimetres deep. Very low water velocity and presence of organic detritus. So we're looking at these areas of deep depositing very fine material. Anything that's less than 15 centimetres deep but has still got that kind of characteristic, it can have patchy sediments interspersed with gravels and cobbles sometimes. This is what we call suboptimal habitat. And you'll find lamprey amocetes in almost any of these pockets of sediment where you have got organic material they can actually use to feed on. But really, in terms of optimal and suboptimal, that's the definition. Is 15 centimetres is the divide. Although it's a little bit open to debate. And typically the kinds of feature that you'd associate with having the lampreys amocetes in would be some kind of backwater, some kind of eddy feature, some kind of depositional feature on the bank, being formed by some other kind of riverine structure. In this case, it's a kind of fallen tree that's creating a bit of a backwater behind it, and an eddy feature. So typically this is where you would go in and do your electrofishing in these soft sediments and actually pull out the amocetes from them. But although that's a kind of a standard area, maybe some of you are familiar with this, there are other areas to look for as well. And there's a lot of other things to consider within the habitat, whether the habitat's going to be used, whether it's going to be actually of good quality or not for lampreys. I think it's fair to say that you're going to find them in almost every kind of habitat that's available, but whether you find them in high numbers or not is going to depend upon an awful lot of different features which are not often easy to kind of quantify. So just to kind of list some of them here, we've got to think about suboptimal habitats, also including areas of organic detritus overlying bedrocks. There's even temporary things, accumulations of leaves that are from an autumnal leaf drop that have started to kind of decompose but are providing some food source. They might be temporarily used by amicetes. Submerged tree roots can trap sediment, that's a good one. Silt-dominated cattle drinks, submerged bankside vegetation rooted in sand and silt, they can be used as well. They might not be used for very long, but they can provide temporary resting places for amicetes as they travel between maybe the more preferred and more stable sites. We've also got to think about the lamprey community structure and associated habitat features, looking at how far away you are from the actual spawning locations. If you find you've got lots and lots of amicete habitat, lots of slow depositing river system with lots of sediments around, but there isn't any of your spawning areas in that kind of reach, then it's unlikely you're going to have very high densities of amicetes, because the adults need to have somewhere suitable to spawn as well. So rather like salmonids, you need to have the different habitats for different life history stages. Quite often we'll find the deepest and most stable sediments, the ones that when you go in your waders you sink up to your thighs in, the ones you want to avoid. You think, oh, that would be great, lamprey habitat, that's perfect, nice and stable. Actually we don't really find very many lampreys in them. We might find quite a few very large lampreys that have settled there or have stayed there, but we don't find them to be particularly well in terms of the actual overall density. And we're not sure why that is, whether it's because of the kind of the layering of organic material and anoxia that might happen there. But deep and stable sediments don't always equate to the highest densities of lampreys, and it's a very important point. High 0+ larval densities, that's the very small ones, the newly settled ones, often are encountered just in July and August, just when they're settling, and they're using kind of any little scrape, any little bit of sediment as a means of just kind of getting out of the flow, settling for maybe a night or two and then moving on downstream. So they might not look as if they're important, but actually they can hold thousands and thousands of amicetes, these tiny little areas along the banks at certain times of the year. So the kinds of things we're looking for lamprey habitat, associated riverine features, clearly things like eddies, big obvious things, water's backing up in itself, has a chance to drop the sediment it's carrying, and therefore with the amicetes being held as they are with like sediment, they'll be dropped out as well. They're very passive, they don't swim very well. And confluences, again, where water velocity is reducing. Around island features, backwaters, margins, wherever you have any kind of retardation of flow. Embayments, debris dams, and that might also include things like beaver dams, and man-made structures. Certainly you find a lot of lamprey survey sites are associated with bridges, and that's not just because they are easy to get to, but the actual bridge founds can create localised areas of deposition which are often utilised by lampreys. And the kind of things that make a good lamprey habitat patch even better can be whether if it's shaded, you can find that often it's finding more lampreys there. Macrophyte presence, not sure if there's a direct link, or it's just the fact that that's also good for macrophytes to root in. It means that you've got some stable sediments, some good organic material that's useful for the macrophytes to actually grow in as well. Large woody debris is very important, provides a bit of stability in some of our gravel rivers, and riparian tree cover. And riparian tree cover itself may be just important because it's actually providing the roots, providing the actual structure for some of these patches. So these are all the things that make identifying lamprey habitat. Look for them. You should be trying to find these kind of things and look for the big features, but also consider all of these little kind of, these features that maybe are going to influence upon whether they're good or bad patches. One thing that has come to light fairly recently is that we tend to kind of look for lampreys along the edges of rivers, and we sample them using electric fishing along the edges of rivers. But it's not always saying that's where they're going to be. We certainly find them in lakes and lochs, finding them 10 metres deep in grabs, coming up with amicetes as well. And just recently there's been some work being done in France showing that sea lampreys, when they looked at where they were actually found in a particular river system, they were finding the majority of them in patches of sediment that was located over 2 metres deep. So that's 2 metres of water above it, not the actual 2 metres of sediment depth. So be aware that although we kind of tend to think our focus is on the margins, there are habitats in our river systems that are too deep for us really to look at and sample. Okay, so just some images of various different features that might have lampreys in them, or we found lampreys in them, some of the issues associated with them. Look at backwaters or side channels in our main river systems. There's the thing that really controls whether they're well occupied or not is the degree of connectivity. So if you have a backwater area that's always connected at the top end or bottom end, allows the amicetes to actually get into it all the time, then it's likely you'll have quite a decent population in there. If you have one that's only connected at high flows, then it's less likely to be as important or have such a high density of amicetes. Often we find in these kind of big stable features that we've got deep sediments built up, but high organic content and a level of anoxia, which means that they're not as good as they might initially consider. When you look at them just on a map, you might see a big side arm and think, well, that's going to be full of lampreys, and you go there, there's not much there. So frequently we do find low population densities, but they do occupy often a large area. So some of these features could be 400 or 500 square metres of them, and even if they have very low densities in them, they're still actually from population level quite important because they're occupying a large area themselves. Channel margins, all kinds of different channel margins. We have them here going with, we have kind of rushes where you have them just with grass banks that are managed for angling. There'll still be silt in there, there'll still be amicetes actually in these little embayments. They're not particularly covering a large area, but they do have, they're often very well spaced out in your system. So you have a lot of these and they'll cover a lot of kind of small patches but quite high densities in them, and they're often used very much by the smallest lampreys. So often associated with flow diversions, you'll get these things where you have a croy put in, for example, or something, a small marginal patch behind them. And they're open for immigration or movement of lampreys under a large range of water heights, and that's important, this connectivity. They're always, at some stage, lampreys can always settle in them, so that helps the constant turnover of population. Typically you get high densities there. Sometimes they're shallow and sometimes temporary or unstable habitats, but a lot of people would just walk by these and think there's nothing there. They don't typically look like lamprey features. They're not the eddy feature, they're not a big, slow, deep sediment layer. Don't be put off by the fact that the lampreys will quite often be occupying things that are only 3 or 4 centimetres deep. So they have to, just bear that in mind when you're looking for a lamprey habitat. One of the things we find is a key component of a good lamprey habitat is that you've got to have a food source, and often this kind of high organic material where you have leaves falling down and actually providing that leaf source, where you see that, it's a good indication that you've got a regular supply of organic material into a patch. So in autumn, if you're doing these kind of walks around and you see where leaves are accumulating, then you can be have fairly high confidence that there will be some kind of lamprey habitat either underneath them or over the course of years building up. So they're indicators of sediment deposition. They're actually allowing you to see where sediments are accumulating. It enables a through flow of water and oxygen in them through the leaf matrix. But if they do get trapped underneath a layer of kind of compacted silt, they can cause these anoxic conditions to occur. So it's not saying that in every case it's going to be used exclusively by the lamprey. But it's a good indicator, I think. That and definitely large woody debris is a good thing. If we can find large woody debris, you do definitely have more lamprey accumulating around them. Man-made structures, as I mentioned, bridge founds or downstream from bridges where you have a bit of flow retardation, you can often find a nice patch of lamprey habitat downstream from bridges. Conflues and field drains on a much smaller scale, where a single pipe comes in, where a single field drain will come in. Often you'll have a tiny little accumulation of suitable habitat, but they'll be used. There'll be lampreys in there. I'm not going to guarantee anything, but you're most likely to find them there. This is a sewage outflow, not the best place to sample in the world, but certainly full of lampreys. Very high organic content there. They're often unstable and susceptible to removal at high flows, and there might be water quality issues with the water coming in, so bear that in mind too. But it's always a good place to kind of look and identify. Riparian trees, really important. We've been finding more and more that when you have large expanses of open bank, the amount of lamprey habitat that's available along those banks is often quite limited. As soon as you get into areas of kind of riparian scrub, there's much more in the way of habitat available. And that's, I think, not only just because of the actual structure it creates, but also the organic material coming from riparian trees. So it facilitates sediment deposition, it protects the bank in high flows, it allows sediment to be caught by the trees themselves, and willow is perfect for this. It actually acts as a way of kind of sieving out even more material and then allowing it to accumulate underneath it. Large woody debris, perfect for lampreys. Temporary marginal sediments as well, not great in the long run for lampreys, but they do provide temporary places for them to hold up in between going to the better patches as they are moving downstream. So there's a variety of things to look for. It isn't just the classic, here's an eddy, it's going to be full of lamprey amices. Consider things to do with the actual stability of the feature, what's made that feature, is it something that's going to be there for a long time, what's around it, is it close to some place where lampreys might use as a spawning location, and also things like whether we've got a kind of anoxic conditions there, put a stick into it, see if you're getting gas bubbles up from the sediment itself, and you can build up a kind of a picture of quality without actually having to go and do electrofishing in that area.